If you have a Bible, you should open it. If you have a device with the Bible on it, you should do what you do with that device. And get yourself to Exodus 19. Exodus 19. I'm going to just go ahead and give this away up front because I've already mentioned it. We are about to start a new sermon series. 10 sermons on the 10 Commandments. And I don't hear a lot of churches preaching or teaching with completeness on the commandments. And we might think of the commandments as being, well, they were old news or old covenant or outdated, but I happen to be of the school of thought that the 10 Commandments are God's morality explained. God's character and God's desire for how we're supposed to live put into a code. A code of human conduct. God's moral code. And I don't know how you could take something that's God's moral code and say that it's maybe not that important, or that it's old, or that it's dated, or that it's not still relevant for us today. I do not believe that was for one group of people, or for just Israel, or for just a time. It's God's moral code. And by the way, that's all 10. And most Christians I know would agree with everything I just said in sentiment, but then in practice or in function, they will not necessarily teach on all 10 commandments. I also don't think any one commandment deserves special treatment. I don't think any one commandment is more important than the others, but I also don't think any one commandment could be dropped or is somehow nullified or changed. So, what I want to do today is to point out, though, before we even get there, I want to point out that God does some pretty interesting things when he makes major announcements. When he's got something to announce, God really kind of puts on a show. There's some fanfare involved. And I think about major announcements today. On the way here, there's some thunderstorms passing through somewhere. The radio, you get the emergency broadcast system. We get those on our phones now too. God forbid there's ever 100 people with iPhones on in an event or a church somewhere, and there's some sort of alert, whether it's an emergency alert or weather alert or whatever it is, and everybody's phones go off. And it seems every time like it's the end of the world. This is it, right? This is the big one, like hide under your chairs. So there's a way to announce things that's sort of dramatic. And we see Hollywood's good about this with new movies that come out or a new thing that's coming up. On July 1st, we're going to announce a new thing that we're doing that you're going to hear more about on September 1st. That's going to be released on January 1st of 2028. You know, like, let's build lots of anticipation. Let's really look forward to this. Musical artists, there's going to be a major announcement coming up, and they make a big deal out of it. Apple was really good about this when they were coming up with a new product. They'd hype everybody up and get press conferences and get people from all over the world and from all the tech industries in to announce what their new big product was going to be. One of the greatest, I think, horrors of American society, and one of the greatest disappointments in my personal life, is people who are having babies doing dramatic, extravagant gender reveal parties. It is the most horrible thing because it goes wrong all the time. The internet is now full of gender reveal fails. And they're amusing to watch sometimes if you ever want to laugh at someone else's misfortune. You know, these people with like pink and blue cannons, you know, and it goes wrong somehow. But there's actually been tragic stories of people getting injured terribly or even dying at these extravagant, often explosive gender reveal things. Some of them take the much gentler approach. They don't want to get into the crazy, pyrotechnics or explosive things. So they do like balloons. And they're going to pop the balloon and find out if it blows up and it's pink or blue and what it's going to be. But then inevitably there's a toddler around that gets the balloon and it flies away and the whole party's there and nobody gets to find out. Or they blow up the balloon and it's pink and blue because the factory did it wrong, and so they get no information. So they fail miserably. And so here they hype everything up. They gather all the family around. They're going to make a major announcement, and then they fail at the major announcement, and it's tragic. Anyone else with me that this is a great sadness in our society? Okay, maybe that was an overstatement, but it's a thing. It never works out. It goes wrong. But I can't blame these people for wanting to make a big announcement about a baby, because a baby's pretty exciting and a new life, and God decided to form a human, and this is a big deal. This is, for any family, this is one of the most significant major life events. So it deserves a big announcement. I'm not saying it doesn't deserve a big announcement. We're just not that good at it. But God's good at it. Think about the ways that God made a big announcement when Jesus was coming. Baby Jesus is coming. God made some pretty dramatic announcements, didn't he? He did the kind of one-on-one angels appearing to Mary, to Joseph, coming in dreams, coming in the sky. He did the break open the skies over the shepherds in the field, and bright blinding lights and voices from heaven and choirs of angels singing. Hey, big announcement. God did a pretty good job, didn't he? Better than Apple, better than iPhones, better than emergency alert systems, better than gender reveal parties. God did a really good job of blasting out, this is big news here. In fact, he even did a little star show. Remember that? Moved stars around, aligned stars, made a big bright glowing star that moved over the course of several years to tell people that this thing was happening and led them right to Jerusalem. Pretty big, pretty crazy announcement kind of stuff. God's good at making a dramatic announcement. God invented drama. There's that thunderstorm we were warned about. That's perfect timing. There's going to be thunder in the message today. Okay, so I hope that when I say thunder in a minute, when we're reading Exodus, that the thunder happens. But anyway, God's good at this announcement thing. And he invented what we think is we invent drama and making big announcements. God did it first. God makes the drama, the big announcement. And it's really cool. And so God announced baby Jesus, stars aligning, all these kind of things. And he reserves the biggest, most dramatic announcement kind of things for the most important events. Jesus coming was pretty significant, right? Pretty important in God's whole biblical timeline, God's whole gospel timeline. The coming of the Messiah to earth, the deliverer, the Savior, was pretty important. And because it was pretty important, God did a pretty major show for the announcement of his arrival. So just keep that in mind about God, okay? That's how God works. Now let's read our passage in Exodus 19. Now, I'm going to skip through the first part of 19 and just summarize. Essentially, if you remember back a few weeks to David dancing before the ark, and remember the Ark of the Covenant being brought in, and anyone who touched the ark, who was not given permission to touch the ark, even Uzzah, with all the best intentions, right, just sees the ark shifting and decides to put his hands on it, and he's struck down. This idea that God is so holy and the ark is so holy that God wants to establish reverence and an understanding of who he is. So at the beginning of 19, that's what you have going on at Mount Sinai. So you, in Sabbath school today, some of you were there, most of you were there, a lot of you were there. You talked about the Exodus. You talked about all these dramatic things that happened as God brought the people out of bondage, brought them out of slavery, brought them out of Egypt. Pretty dramatic things happened, right? So these people had seen some stuff. They've seen things that you and I have never seen. They saw things that would just blow our minds, that would, wow, parting of the sea. And we travel through the dry land and the sea swallows up the Egyptians behind us. The manna the quail, and I mean, they have seen some things. Not to mention, before they even got out there into the wilderness, the plagues and seeing how God dealt with Egypt. So these people have seen some things in terms of, whoa, God is God. Okay? They've seen some things. So they know, but still, God says, now that they're out here camped out near the base of Mount Sinai, where they can see Mount Sinai, this nice big mountain, all kinds of arguments about exactly which mountain that is and where it is, not relevant. They're there at this mountain, and they can see the mountain, and God says, tell the people, to Moses, not to even go touch the mountain, because this is holy ground right here. God's going to show up and do something, and his presence is here. So he says, tell them to not even come up and touch the mountain. Don't even try to get here. Don't even try to come too close, because they'll be struck down. Okay, dramatic announcement, step one. God establishes a perimeter and says, listen, in this area, something really big is happening. Presence of Almighty God is going to be here in a way that you can't handle. Big announcement. Okay? So that's where the big announcement starts. So that's the gist of what goes on in the first 15 verses, is telling them that something significant is going to happen. Don't even come up here and touch the mountain. We're going to pick it up in verse 16. So we're in Exodus chapter 19, and we're picking up in verse 16. On the morning of the third day, there was thunder. Waited my whole life for that. To read about thunder from the Word of God and have God provide the thunder. Did I tell you he was good at drama? He really is. For those of you listening to the recording later, I'm going to add thunder sound effects so that you hear it, because it was great. Would that be disingenuous? I don't know. God invented drama. On the morning of the third day, there was thunder and lightning with a thick black cloud over the mountain, and a very loud trumpet blast. Just pause right there for a second, because when I read these stories, I want us to slow down. We can read this, the rest of 16 or chapter 19 right here. We could read that in about 70 seconds. This does not take place over 70 seconds. And there's some pretty significant stuff going on right here. So I want you to slow down. If I had it, I would have been dramatic and had fog come up and like a big Mount Sinai could rise up out of the platform, so we could get like sight and sound theater visuals going, but we don't have that. So use your eyelids, okay, imagination. They're outside of in the desert and a little ways away from Mount Sinai, looking at this mountain, and God has already announced, don't go anywhere near it. Some big things are happening. There's already anticipation. The presence of God is going to be here. Now there's thunder and lightning. Now, in the most normal situation, thunder and lightning can be a little bit scary, or a little bit intimidating, or a little bit ominous. They are, at least to some degree, to be taken seriously. Take shelter when it's appropriate. Handle thunder and lightning appropriately. There are storm warnings that come, because where there's thunder and lightning, there could be even worse elements of a storm coming. I don't know if you know this, but sometimes children don't love thunder and lightning, especially when they're small and it's scary. I don't know if you know this, but dogs don't always like thunder and lightning, or pets or animals. Last night, there was thunder, and Rollo did not like it. And when there's thunder, and Rollo, he's our Beagle mixed dog, does not like it. Rollo shares our bed with us for that night, because that doesn't normally happen, but he gets scared, and he's going to keep everyone else awake, walking around the house, and possibly barking. So thunder and lightning just themselves can be intimidating. So they're looking at the mountain, and there are storms, and there's thunder and lightning happening, and there is a thick cloud over the mountain. Clouds can just look ominous. They can just look scary sometimes. This is a noteworthy cloud, okay? So there is a thick cloud, and then you've got thunder, you've got lightning, you've got a thick cloud, all that. And then there is a very loud trumpet blast. Now, I don't know what very loud means, but it means that if there's an implication here that the trumpet blast does not come from people playing trumpets. the trumpet blast is God's sound effect, God's trumpet. It doesn't say the people grabbed trumpets and blew trumpets. It just says there was a very loud trumpet blast. So the sky is lighting up, there's lightning, there's thunder, and then there's loud sort of trumpet blast sounds. Now, I don't know about you, but this would sort of terrify me. I don't think any of us would be ready for this moment, to stand there and to see this sight, and to have already had the anticipation of God announcing that this is holy ground, something big is going to happen here. So now we've got thunder, we've got lightning, we've got a big, thick cloud over the mountain, and a very loud trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp trembled. Now, there's a reason why I just gave you the warm-up that I gave you, reminding you of all the things that they've been through in the last 3 to 6 months. They're about 3 months into their time in the desert here. So the months before they left Egypt and the few months since they've left Egypt, these people have seen some things. They've seen seas parted. They've seen God move in some pretty spectacular, amazing ways. All those things you were talking about in Sabbath school. They've seen some things, yet when they see this, they trembled. That tells me that whatever God had done, you ever go and you see fireworks and you think, oh wow, these are really impressive fireworks, and your chest vibrates a little bit and they're booming a little bit and you're like, this is really impressive. But then it's like they waited and then they kick it up a notch. And you're like, whoa, something much bigger just happened. I get that feeling from this. These people had seen some things, but God just kicks it up a notch here, to where all of a sudden he really has the people's attention. He has a very, very big announcement to make. Thunder, lightning, clouds, trumpets blasting loud, and everyone in the camp, it's so impressive that they trembled at the sight of God. How long did that go on, by the way? No, it doesn't say. You're all looking for the answer. No, I looked too. It's not there. So I'm asking a question that we can't actually answer. But I'm guessing it was more than 30 seconds. If God's going to go to all this trouble, like how long do you think the thunder and lightning went? Do you think it increased in intensity? Do you think the thunder got louder and louder? And do you think it grew? And do you think this cloud kind of rolled and it didn't just, oh, there's a little cloud. Like Bob Ross just dabbed his brush on the canvas. No, I think this thing grew. And God's presence grew, and the trumpet blast kind of came on and started blasting. This could have gone on for minutes. It could have gone on for hours. We're not told, but God's doing a big thing, and the people are trembling. Then Moses, verse 17, then Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Now, again, pause. I know, it's so annoying. They're like, come on, just let us read the story. Just think, they're trembling. This is going on. They're watching the mountain. How far out are they from the mountain? We don't know exactly. But they're out in the desert where they can see Mount Sinai and see this happening. Moses says, hey, everybody, let's go closer to the base of the mountain and talk to God. Again, I don't know about you, but I know that Rolo, our dog, would not go. I know the kids would say, no, thank you. I know probably many of us would say, how about we pick a little team to go first and see if God wants to say anything to us. We've already been warned that if we get too close and there's a line that we're not exactly sure where it is, that if we cross, we'll be struck dead. And we're already shaking in our boots. We're already trembling right now, looking at what's happening on this mountain. And then Moses says, let's go over there to the base of the mountain and talk with God now. I would be scared to talk with God. In that moment, in that situation, I think most of us would be scared to talk to God. But Moses led people out of the camp to the base to meet with God. They stood at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai, verse 18, was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace. the whole mountain trembled violently. Pause for a second. Okay. God descended on the mountain in fire. Just unpack that for a minute. What exactly did that look like? I've often said at Pentecost, it says the Spirit of God, came down like tongues of fire. I don't know exactly what that looked like, but I can tell you this, whatever was happening at Mount Sinai was bigger. Maybe significantly bigger. God descended. And when I read this the first time, I thought, this sounds like a volcanic eruption. The hot lava and spewing fire and the whole mountain's on fire. I'm picturing Mount St. Helens in Washington in 1980 or 81, whenever that was. I'm picturing that, like a volcanic eruption. Except that we're specifically told, in case you wanted to make this metaphorical, that would be, I think, heretical and wrong, because it does not say that it was a volcanic eruption. In fact, the fire didn't come from inside and come out. It can't be explained as a volcanic eruption that they mistook for something else, because God descended on the mountain. The fire came from up and went down. You don't need to be a Hebrew scholar to know that's what they mean when they say descended. This, whatever it was, came from the heavens down. That's not a volcanic eruption, my friends. That's God. And it would scare the living daylights out of me, and I think most of us. The Lord descended to the top of Mount Sinai. I mean, the mountain was covered with smoke. Do you think it smelled like smoke? You know the forest fires in Canada? And the smoke's coming down and coming all over the place? Usually where there's smoke, there's fire. Where there's fire, there's smoke. I have no reason to believe that trees weren't burning or that things on the mountain weren't burning, that there wasn't a real significant consuming fire kind of thing going on, or that it might not have been smoky, that it might not have been crackling, that it might not have been noisy, that there might not have been a sound with this. Listen, God's the ultimate drama guy, right? This is God theater right here. God's got a big announcement to make. He's making some lights and some sound and some noise. Do you think there was heat? I bet there was. I can't say for sure, but I bet there was. The kind of heat that these guys are going to feel when they get home if they're not good in church. I bet there was heat. I bet there was bright light. I bet the smoke was smoky. And the smoke and the fire and all of it covers the whole mountain because the Lord descended on it like fire or in fire. The smoke billowed up from the top like smoke from a furnace. And the whole mountain trembled violently. Now, it doesn't say the thunder and lightning stopped. We've still got thunder and lightning. We've still got crazy stormy clouds. Now we have descending fire. The mountain seemingly consumed with fire. We have heat. We have light. We have lightning. We have sound effects. We have a burning mountain in front of us. And the trumpet's still blasting. And the people are still trembling. And as if all of that wasn't enough, God's like, turn the knob a little bit more. And the whole mountain starts shaking. We now have earthquake activity. Boulders falling down the side of the mountains. Perhaps landslides, mudslides, rocks falling. Wow. This is a pretty crazy little story right here. We're only 4 verses in to a description of a moment. But I don't think this is a minute either. I think this is happening over some time. And I think the people are scared to death. The whole mountain trembles violently, and in verse 19, and the sound of the trumpet, listen, grew louder and louder. I had a recurring nightmare when I was a kid. We lived close enough to the little fire station in our little hometown of Berlin, just up the hill, just up the street from the fire station. When the fire whistle blew, it was like the most haunting sound to me. Because one, it meant something was going wrong somewhere, or there was an emergency, and it was also just really loud. So for me as a kid, it was just like the the scariest sound. And I had this recurring dream where someone in my dream, I think it was my dad, it was either my dad or an older brother, never really necessarily mattered, but we were throwing a baseball back and forth in the yard. And we'd throw the baseball back and forth, and the fire siren would go off. And as the fire siren went off, we threw the baseball faster and faster to each other, and the siren got louder and louder and louder, and we had to throw the baseball faster and faster as the siren got louder and louder and louder, and we had to throw the ball faster, and it got louder. You get the idea, right? Till I woke up as a 6-year-old kid, sweating. Scary dream. I don't know why I had that dream. I had it, by the way, till our house burned down, and then I never had it again. So, prophecy, I don't know. But nonetheless, I had this recurring nightmare. And when I hear this, that's the kind of feeling that I get when I read this. If I really let myself go there and try to stand in front of Mount Sinai and try to see and hear this, that's the same feeling I get. This trumpet is getting louder and louder and louder over the roar of an entire mountain on fire and thunder and lightning and God's presence there. It had to be entirely overwhelming. Extremely intense. Just downright crazy. The sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder. Then Moses spoke, and the voice of God answered him. Okay. So over everything else, at the height of the sight and the sound and the drama, Moses speaks to God. What exactly? I don't know. And God speaks back to him. Let's add to everything else that's happening right now and all this drama, the voice of God himself speaking back out of heaven. Like, I wish I was there, but I don't. But I do. The only consolation I have is I know I'm gonna see him someday face to face, and I'm gonna hear and know his voice face to face. So I can wait for that. If I wasn't gonna get that, I'd want to go back so I could see this moment. But I'll skip this moment and wait for eternity. Thank you, thunder. Verse 20. The Lord descended to the top of Mount Sinai and called Moses to the top of the mountain. After he's already descended in fire, I don't even know what that sentence means. If he comes out of the fire, if he's already there, if there's an additional descending, an additional outpouring of his presence, if he physically manifests himself another way, I don't know. But God comes down to the top of the mountain and calls Moses, summons Moses to come to the top of the mountain. So Moses went up, and the Lord said to him, now pause. Moses went up, and the Lord said to him. We read that as if God's up there on our fake Mount Sinai set, and the Lord called him, and Moses went up. Like, wait right there, I'm going to go talk to God. And then Moses goes there and talks to God. This is a mountain. Moses went up to the top of the mountain to talk to God. That sentence is many, many, many hours, if not a day. That's not a minute. Moses doesn't say, wait a minute, I'm going to run up to the top of the mountain here and talk to God. He summoned me. Moses journeys to the top. Moses may have very well packed some things and some food and said, God has told me to go up to the top of the mountain to meet with him, so I'm going to go there. This is not a minute or two. This is a big thing that's happening. So I just don't want you to miss it. I want you to slow down and see what's happening. God calls Moses to the top of the mountain. So Moses went up, verse 21, and the Lord said to him, after he got up there, go down and warn the people so they don't force their way through to see the Lord, and many of them perish. Even the priests who approach the Lord must consecrate themselves, or the Lord will break out against them. Again, God's saying, make sure they know down there, Moses. Did you warn them? The severity. This is serious. There's reverence here. This is no joke. Moses reassures him. Moses says to the Lord, the people cannot come up Mount Sinai because you yourself warned us. Put limits around the mountain and set it apart as holy. So Moses is saying, check, I did it, God. I've already told them. Nobody's coming near it. Probably he had some people guarding to make sure that nobody tried to do anything stupid. It's taken care of, God. They're not going to come up on the mountain. It has been set apart. And the Lord replied, go down and bring up Aaron with you. But the priests and the people must not force their way through to come up to the Lord, or he will break out against them. So Moses went down to the people and told them. Okay. So he says, go get Aaron. I'm going to talk to you and Aaron, but not anybody else. Nobody else comes up. I'm going to bring Aaron up, and we're going to talk together. So Moses says, okay, I'll do that. And Moses and Aaron go back up on the mountain. And they're going to talk to God. Now, I just want to pause for a second and say, I don't think the things we read in the Bible about the way God does things are an accident. So everything that God does is done with such intentionality, down to the smallest details. And sometimes they're really fun. When Moses was standing there, and they're all looking at Mount Sinai, and the whole mountain is now burning, do you think that Moses didn't think, now that's a big bush? Because remember, not too long before, Moses stood in God's presence, and God was in a burning bush. Could have been a few feet high, could have been 10 feet high, but it was a bush. And the bush was burning, and Moses was like, whoa! Freaked out, and took off his shoes and said, I'm standing on holy ground. Moses is standing there, and God's presence is like fire in a bush, burning. Now Moses is standing there again, and God's like, let me take that fire that I showed you before and multiply it by about 300,000 and light up this whole mountain. You see, I think every time God's getting increasingly bigger. When God has an announcement, Moses, I have something for you to do. It's big and it's important, and I'm going to show up in a burning bush to really make a splash and really make a dramatic announcement to you, to get your attention. But then this is kind of bigger. And he makes a really big burning bush, a whole mountain. And then if you just fast forward, and by the way, he makes the mountain shake a little bit, and a little earthquake going on with it. So now we got sound effects and shaking earth and fire. And then fast forward to when Jesus is coming back at the end. And what does he say? There's going to be earthquakes and fire that's going to consume and destroy everything. And he's going to redo creation and make everything right. Everything's going to be burned. There's going to be massive earthquakes and fire, an announcement that God is doing something big. Do you see those three things of how God's saying, look, when I want to come and make an announcement, I'm going to come and make an announcement, and you're going to know it's me. It increases. And at the burning bush, Moses knew he was on sacred ground, so he kicks off his shoes. I'm on holy ground. And he was reverent. At Sinai, God says, don't let anyone even come and touch the perimeter. Make a boundary around this mountain, because the whole place is sacred ground. And there's reverence. And at the end times, when Jesus comes back and there's fire and earthquakes and everything, it says every knee will bow. Every tongue will confess that Jesus is Lord. The sign gets bigger. The announcement gets bigger. The ramifications get bigger. And the reverence and the respect and understanding of who God is grows with each one. All big announcements. God's going to deliver his people. And then God's going to bring this covenant. And then God's going to provide his law and his moral code and say, these are my people. I'm going to be with you forever. And then we get the Messiah, right? And all the stars and all the other angels breaking through the sky. The big announcements of deliverance again through a Messiah. And then ultimately, in the end of things, that big restoration and completion of God's earth story. And I give you all of that for a couple reasons. One, it's just cool to see how God works. It's just cool to look at the bigger picture. You know, Moses maybe in that moment couldn't see all of that, but we can zoom out from it and look at that and say, wow, look how God has done this. Look how God did these things. And human authors couldn't weave together a story like this. Look how God has moved. It's just fascinating and exciting and faith-building to see how God works and to see how he moves. But also, in this particular case, he made this really, really big announcement. So if the story was just Sinai, God did this thing and showed this, and the people were in awe, and they were like, wow, this is God. And then there was nothing that followed. Then all the smoke went away, the fire died down, the thunder and lightning went away, and everyone went back to work. If that was all, it's still a fascinating story of God's power and showing up to meet with his people. But that's not what the point was. All of that fanfare was to get their attention, to light everybody up, to wake everybody up, to call together the press conference, to make a big deal because he had something to say, something to give them, something specific. And based on the size and scale of the announcement party, I think it has to be pretty significant. Wouldn't you want to know if you were at all interested in the things of God? So if you keep reading, and God spoke all of these words, what did he say? After he had all their attention, in this moment, what did God say to Moses? What did he tell Moses to give the people? And we have Exodus chapter 20, the 10 Commandments. God lays out and gives his moral code for all of humanity, for all of time. Revelation of his character and how he wants anybody who are called his people to live. Does this not seem like it's important? I think this is really, really important. I think this is one of the most important moments and one of the most important chapters of the Bible. Whatever God says after that earth-shaking, fire-breathing mountain thing, I think must be one of the most important things to Christians. And it's God's moral code in the 10 Commandments. Right living, right relationship with God, right living with each other, to set his people apart. So, with all of that said, from now till early October, we're going to focus on these 10 Commandments in Exodus chapter 20. Because I think it's still very, very important. And I think the thunder right now is proof. That was an exaggeration. I don't think that. I think it's stormy out. But I think it's still really,